Your call has been placed in conference.
Is being recorded. Great. So I am going to continue. I was also presenting with my colleague that is heading the program as well, my colleague Babe O'Sullivan. She is not here today, but I will make sure I will include all her comments and her great insight that she added during the initial presentation. And my name is Marie Diodati. I am the point person for this Repair and Reuse grant, and I'll be hosting this presentation. And if you have any questions after listening to this webinar, make sure to give me a call or send me an email. My contact info is all over the website. My office phone is linked to my cell now, so there's a bunch of ways to contact me. So let's continue. So just an overview of what we're going to be doing today. I'm going to give you a bit of background on the grant program because I understand and really relate to people wanting to understand the bigger picture before diving into a specific grant program. So I want to give you that background information. I'll explore key terms that are really important to understand before filling out the application. I'll talk about the grant documents and the grant specifications that are really specific to this current reuse and repair cycle. We'll talk about the key 6 questions that are in the application document, additionally to the budget tables. And then we will dive into examples of the previous cycle and the key timeline and next steps for this grant program. So I want to initially acknowledge that this grant program was adapted to the current COVID outbreak that is affecting all of us, but I know is very much and deeply affecting small businesses all around the world, but specifically we're talking about Oregon business and more specifically here reuse and repair businesses. So initially, the grant program was to support workforce development because it was clearly identified from our research and our experience with talking with people on working in businesses that investing in training of new employees was a barrier for organizations because they didn't have the time or the money to do that. They were too busy just spending time making sure to respond to all the demands and respond to the services they wanted to provide. And that really affects the workload and the succession planning. So this grant was initially built for this. However, because right now workforce development seems like a luxury, we're more talking about keeping our businesses open. We want to address that, and because of that, one of the main things that we adapted was eligible costs. It's not, now the grant is not only for new staff that you're bringing in, it's also to support current reuse and repair position within your organization. So that's first of all a key thing to remember. We were also able to push back the deadline based on recommendations from the public. So instead of handing in your application on May 8th, you're able to hand it in up until June 5th, just to get yourself time to organize more and get yourself more familiar with all of the grant material. So it's really because it's already a hard industry to be in, so we really want to make sure you survive this crisis, and this is why we made our modification to the costs that were eligible, as well as modifying the deadline. So stepping back, before we dive into the grant program, I can't not talk about the Materials Management 2050 vision. It's a great document to consult before diving into your application. It's great homework to understand what the Materials Management Program at DEQ is all about. And it really is the guiding document for our program. It helps us understand where we want to be, who needs to be included, how we need to go about it. Because it's really important for us, and based on this document, we want to make sure we protect our resources, we conserve our environment, and we also want to make sure that the well-being of everybody in Oregon is being addressed. So that's what this document does, and it guides basically the programs that we put forward and the decisions that we make, the decision that materials management make. And just to clarify a bit what the program is all about, it's about materials, and materials matter because they're essential to our economy, our environment, and our communities. The extraction, the manufacturing, transport, use, and disposal of materials has profound impact on the air we breathe, the water we drink, the productivity of our soils, and the health of numerous ecosystems. So when we say materials, even though it might sound abstract, we're really referring to non-fuel materials, as you can see on the screen, that flow through our economy, such as paper, plastic, metal, glass, food, wood, and so forth. Disposable products, consumable products, and durable goods. All these materials impact the environment, and Oregon's 2050 vision calls for us to reduce these impacts, whether the materials are made here in Oregon or somewhere made somewhere else, but simply used here. So that's the mentality behind our program. And once you get to know the 2050 vision, you'll come across a lot of language that reference the life cycle approach. And when you're considering materials, you want to consider the full impact that they have at the different phases of its life cycle. And reading through the vision and other documents that you might encounter from the program, we often reference it and the differences between upstream and downstream impacts of material, and this is related to this life cycle approach. And it's not just about focusing on if you're recycling your items or disposing of them or composting them. The program is really interested in understanding where the environmental impacts are happening and where are they the most impactful. Is it during the extraction, the manufacturing, the transportation, the use, or the end-of-life management? And the reuse and repair program is so important and really connects here because we want to keep the materials and the products in this blue icon, the home and business use, as long as possible. We want to extend their life and their lifespan in that phase, in that blue phase here, to make sure that we don't need to go back up here in materials extraction and processing and manufacturing to extract virgin materials and produce new products just because a particular component of an item is broken. Your business is helping do that. It's the key of making sure reuse and repair is possible, and that's why the program Materials Management truly believes in supporting this essential industry. So, I don't know if you can see this. I'm just going to close now, and because of your expertise, you're well aware of all the benefits of supporting and making sure the reuse and repair industry is alive. But this document really allowed us to kick off this pilot grant program in 2017 and really allows us to continue doing work within the reuse and repair world. And in that document, the program clearly explains that the reuse and repair industry allows us to provide accessible and affordable choices to consumers, as well as it reduces the environmental impact of producing new material and manufacturing new material. And of course, key to this grant program, it contributes to a local workforce development, employment, and economic activity, and in this case, retention. So another good read if you do have the time. So my colleague Babe was the one who was able to overview these terms, so I'll try to keep it at her level. You can also find all of these definitions in the reuse and repair materials management grant website. In the instruction document of the grant, we list those out because understanding these definitions is really key to making sure you can apply to this grant. From one organization to another, sometimes the definition of reuse gets mixed up. In this case, I want to clarify that reuse is maintaining a product or material in its original form and keeping it in service. It's all about maintaining its original form. It's not about transforming something that was initially broken into something else. And the whole reasoning behind that is what we talked about initially. We want to keep that product in its intended use, so people can continue using it for what they bought it in the first place, or for the reason somebody else bought it in the first place. So we don't need to go all the way back up again and produce something new. So that's the thinking behind this key definition that you're probably, I know, already familiar with. Repair is restoring the function of a product by replacing or fixing broken components. Refurbishment is cleaning, repairing, and or reconditioning a product that has been returned to a retailer or a manufacturer so it can be resold. Remanufacturing, a bit more intense process, but still kind of key linked components, is a complete disassembly and overhaul of the entire product and its parts to return it to a like-new condition. So what do all these terms have in common is making sure we can still use the product as it was intended to be used initially. It's just the actions related to it have varying effects. Workforce development is recruitment, training, and retention of skilled labor to create and sustain a viable workforce. In this case of the grant, we're also talking about workforce maintaining your workforce, maintaining the workforce that is linked to reuse and repair work. So I want to pause and make sure that we address the terms of equity and well-being. You're going to see them in a lot of the materials management document, and you're going to see them appear in your application document and in the instruction document. And the reason behind that is that we want to make sure that reuse and repair opportunities, whether it be having access to services or reused products or repaired products, or being able to work in a reuse and repair business, is known and accessible for everybody living in Oregon. We are trying to support the reuse and repair industry throughout the state, and we understand that the context is very different from one region to another, but it's still important for us to acknowledge it and to work towards opportunities for everybody. Every group in Oregon should know about this and should have access to reuse and repair opportunities. And in the instruction document, we highlight the definition of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We leaned on our partners, Metro, to share definitions that we fully stand behind, because DEQ, even though it's a major priority for us, we are still working on our own definition of these terms to be sharing in our own documents. But to be all on the same page, if you reference the documents that are the definitions that are in our instruction document, you'll get all the information that you need. And we'll dive into what I'm talking about a bit more when we tackle these actual questions that are linked to equity and well-being in the application document a bit later. So these are the grant application and instruction documents, key documents for your application. You can find them here on the website that's shown here on the reuse and repair page. You can download the version, the application version, a fillable PDF or a Word, and just finally, before you send it in, make sure you save it as a PDF and you send it over to the email that's showcased in the first page of the instruction document. So one question I get a lot, and that's super normal because this is a different qualification than the General Materials Management Grant Program, is the fact that who can apply to this grant? And the answer is for-profit businesses or nonprofit businesses. So for-profit businesses, if you're smaller than 50 employees, if you're a small for-profit business, you can apply yourself and directly to this grant opportunity. Your activities, whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit, needs to be linked to reuse and repair. It needs to be a core component of your activity. And once again, rely on the definitions that we used a bit earlier to make sure you are linked to those specific definitions and that are on the instruction document as well. You can also have, a program or a specific position within other positions in your organization that are linked to reuse and repair. Super general question, but very essential. The main goal, and this is much more narrower than the general grant program, the funds that you're asking for through this grant program need to be used for the new work of at least one person that can be sustained, or, like we said, because we recently adapted our eligibility criteria, for the retention of current staff necessary for current ongoing operations, and these operations are reuse and repair. So the position, whether it be new or a current one, needs to be linked to reuse and repair. A bit more details on how you can use the fund. You can use it to cover the wages and benefits of these new hires or this current employee, the training for existing or new staff, and that can be internal or external training depending on the expertise that they need to learn. And you can use the funds for capital equipment, but this capital equipment needs to be linked to, let's say, this increased capacity because you brought somebody new forward, or because that current staff is providing more services and to correspond to the demand. And the best example here is, let's say you bring somebody new on, and because of that you can do way more repairs than you initially could. You're going to need to buy a new sewing machine for your repairs. So that is an eligible equipment that you can include in your budget. However, it can only be up to 50% of your overall budget. In the case of this grant, you have a cap at $10,000. So if you're asking for $10,000, you can only use up to $5,000 for capital equipment. Other specifications that are different from, some of them are different than the general grant program, like the first one, you can only submit one grant application. You cannot submit multiple different projects from the same organization. As I said, there's a cap at $10,000 for grants. The total funding available is $120,000 for everybody. There's no matching fund required. There's no points given to matching funds, but you can still, I want to say at question 3, when we ask about how will this position be sustained beyond the grant period, if you're going to be utilizing additional matching funds to kind of support that ongoing position, that might be a good place to talk about it, but it's not required. There's no point linked to it. This is a reimbursement grant, so remember that you need to have a portion of the funds that you're planning to spend already in the bank, because you need to spend the money and then send us a reimbursement request with a proof of payment, and then we process it. That's the whole structure of our grant program. That's something to take into consideration when you're developing your project plan that's included in the grant application. You need to provide a Dun & Bradstreet number, and if you're not familiar with it, please give me a call. I can walk you through the process. There's a character limit per question, and it's a big limit, so we are not worried that you'll be able to fit it in within that limit, but if you're experiencing any problem, of course, let me know. Ideally, send me your application via email. However, because of the current crisis or whatever context you're in, you can't access internet or whatever, please give me a call, and 503, and I'm having a blank on my own phone number. That's great. (503-229-5446) is my office number that's linked to my cell. We can figure out an alternative. That was great. Okay, so let's dive into the application questions. And once again, I'll make a little check to make sure I am still recording. Sorry for interrupting the flow. Just want to make sure we are all on board. Okay, let's continue. So the first of two kind of categories of questions are about what's kind of the values and the mission behind your organization, and that's question A. We ask you to describe your activities, services, numbers of employees, years in operation, mission, and value. And in this case, if you have values linked to diversity, equity, and inclusion, I encourage you to include those here. So whether they're on a website or they're your unofficial book with your employee and you're working towards officializing it, that's all okay. We understand that there's merging priorities here, but if you do have a mission, specific organizational mission and values, please list them here at question A. Then question B is kind of linked to question A because, okay, let's say you have X, Y, Z as your values that you listed at question A. We want to know, how do these come into action? Are your business decisions impacted by your core values? So when we ask, how is your entity committed to creating a welcoming and equitable environment for your patrons and your clients in the community that you're serving, we want to know, any type of examples that might really showcase that you're embodying the values that you have as an organization. So whether it be translating promotional material, opening at certain business hours that are not, mainstream hours, adapting your accessibility to the building, all these types of very unique examples can be listed here. So there's not one unique answer that we're looking for. It's really adapted to your context. Question C is a bonus question. Does your business have a minority or women business certification with Certification Office for Business Inclusion and Diversity, COVID with Business Oregon? So this is a bonus question, only 5 points. It will not have a very big impact on your overall scoring. It's basically an opportunity for us to tell you about COVID, and we know it's specific for for-profit businesses. So even if you're a nonprofit, putting aside the for-profit criteria, even though you don't really have that certification in your books right now, you can still respond to the question accordingly based on your current situation. And it's really just a learning opportunity to make sure everybody knows about this business opportunity with this certification. So if you have more questions about it, don't hesitate to reach out. Second part of the application, really all about, how you're going to be using the funds, your project, what's it all about. Provide a summary of your projects, such as the materials that are going to be repaired or reused, the work of the staff or the current or the new staff that will be performed, and really how you're going to go about it. So let's say you're bringing on somebody new. How are you going to do your outreach to get somebody new on your team? That's what we want to read here. It's really about how will you go about your project, and why is keeping that position, let's say it's for a current employee, why are you keeping that position in? Question number 2 is provide a description of how the funds will be used in your project. So I don't want a budget table here. You'll have later opportunity in the application to really map it out in a budget table, how you're going to be using the funds. Here we want to know what increase or current capacity will be maintained or achieved with this position. So let's say you'll be able to process, 10% more of repaired products a month because of that current employee that can stay on board. This is where you kind of dive into the impacts really of that position that will be funded through this project. And then third, how will the position created or maintained with the help of these grant funds be continued and supported after the grant period? So we understand that these are pretty crazy times and it's hard to predict what's going to happen in a week, and we fully understand that, and the scoring committee will totally have that in mind when it's evaluating your proposal. So work at the best of your capacity here. It's going to be an estimate, and it's going to be based on, your experience from the past. We're not looking for a perfect answer here, but I'm going to give you an example. Let's say that because you'll actually have time to spend time training this newer current staff for the reuse and repair expertise, their work environment will be how much they like their work environment will be very much increased because they will be able to, better achieve the tasks that are at hand. And because of the better work environment, you'll have a better retention rate of your employees. So that's with the increase of capacity, that better retention rate, that better work environment will be kind of the coupling answer to make us understand that this position will keep on beyond the grant period. Whether you can certify it at 100%, you don't know. But tell us what worked in the past. Make us understand how you think this position will stay on beyond the grant period. Okay, so here are a couple examples of past projects we've supported during the pilot initiative in 2017. You probably are familiar with these organizations, really champions of the program. The Renewal Workshop in Cascade Loft, Salvage Works in Portland, Garden Services in Salem, the Toolbox Project in Eugene, JD's Shoe Repair in Portland. You can read more about their story and their project on the Reuse and Repair grant page. There's a link to the summary of these projects that were achieved in 2017. A quick timeline. So you need to be submitting your application for June 5th. This was pushed back a month to be a bit more flexible. Announcement will be made around July 17th. And then for the selected projects, we are going to dive into your grant agreement development, which will kick off with a site visit if the context allows for that. You'll be matched up with a DEQ contact person that will be with you for the duration of your project. We'll also move through a webinar together to talk about what's a grant agreement, how do you submit a reimbursement request, what's the reporting requirements, and so forth. And then you'll be able to develop your grant agreement with your DEQ point person. As you might have seen in the instruction document, you might have been scared off that, hey, it can take 1 to 6 months to develop that grant agreement. We are actively working with our business office to make sure that we stay more towards the 1 to 2 months maximum to develop it, because we really understand your context as small businesses. You need the cash now, and we get that. So I can't make you a promise that we'll get it to you, within 2 weeks. But if you're responsive, you respond to our email quickly when we need to make a correction to the grant agreement. We'll do our best to work with our grant agreement and our business office to finalize as soon as possible, because it's when it's finalized that you can start spending the funds that are linked to it. So this reimbursement timeline is really important to have in mind when you're developing your project plan in your proposal. Of course, we'll be able to adjust your timeline based on, what's actually going on during late July. But it's good to be as realistic as possible in your proposal, and also just to get yourself organized, you'll be able to have a realistic timeline of when you'll have access to the grant funds. So please remember, June 5th is when you need to submit your application. We won't be reviewing anything before June 5th. We're going to review them after we receive all of them. Send your application by email if possible. Tell us what you've included as attachments, and send it in multiple parts. If you are above the 10 megabytes limit, send to the Workforce Grant 2020 email your application submission. And if you have any questions after listening to this webinar, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. All right, so that was a good power through. Here are the images that were throughout the presentation were from our grant recipients from 2017. Thank you, grantees, and the icons are from this website. I'm going to run through the questions I got during the live webinar, but as I said at the beginning, remember, they are all on the frequently asked page document that you can read and look up and even download just on our Reuse and Repair page. And I will be updating that FAQ page every week based on the calls and emails I get. So first question that I got, do you have grant writing resources? I don't have them now, but you'll be able to find a page on the website with online free recommendations of tips how to write a solid grant proposal and grant answer, especially if you're new to the grant world. So if you can't find it online, let me know, but I am working on posting that shortly. Can you use the grant funds for equipment installment services? So my answer is yes, you can. But in the narrative of your application, I'm thinking specifically of question number 2, you need to let us know that the services to install your equipment are necessary for the work, the reuse and repair work that's being done. Just kind of connecting those dots is what you'll need to do to make sure that we kind of green light that category of equipment funds. Can I use the funds for, and remember, only 50% of your total funds can be used for equipment, quote unquote, services. Can the grant funds be used for space or renting out space for something? My first answer is no, but if you want to talk through it more, give me a call, shoot me an email. I want to understand more of your context. But, you know, administrative planning costs like access to internet, if it doesn't have a direct impact on the reuse and repair task that the employees are doing, cannot be included in your project budget. Can I pay for furlough or employees coming back from furlough with my grant funds? The answer is yes, you can pay for employees coming back from furlough. So you can pay for work that's being done in your organization at the time of your project. So if your employees are have been currently furloughed because of the COVID crisis, that's okay. If you're envisioning that you'll reopen or you'll bring back your employees in a couple months when this grant fund will become available, and you're expecting to pay for these employee wages with the grant funds, that is okay. And we understand it's kind of hard to estimate, but we'll work with you and we'll adapt based on your current situation. Can I apply for the grant funds, for the reuse and repair funds and for the general grant program? My answer is yes. Even though the general grant fund is not open yet, if it does open later in the summer, you'll be able to apply to that one as well. If I'm a nonprofit, am I going to be penalized for the bonus question? No. You can still answer it as a nonprofit. You just need to ignore the criteria to qualify for the certification to be a for-profit business. Once again, the bonus question is just a learning opportunity to get to know what is the COVID certification that is offered to for-profit businesses to work with the government. Is there a project deadline? No. You're onboarding your new employee will just be based on how you utilize the fund. It doesn't necessarily need to be over within 6 months or 8 months. You are the one that determines that. And we will officialize that in your grant agreement. Can I bring in two part-time employees or one part-time employee? The answer is yes. As long as you respect how the grant funds can be used, aka for wages or benefits or training, if it's linked to the reuse and repair position, that's all good. If it's two part-time that are equivalent to one full-time, how many ever that works within you utilizing the $10,000 or less, then that's up to you. It just needs to be within the eligible cost types. What are the reporting requirements? You can look at the grant agreement template that's currently on the reuse and repair page on our website. And Exhibit C, so the last page of the template, you'll see the reporting requirements that will be slightly customized to your project. Like, let's say the increase of membership percentage will kind of customize that to your organization. But the other requirements are pretty basic, like what worked, what didn't work. And please note that we do not want to burden you with the reporting. We know the bad reputation sometimes reporting have for grants, and we know you have a lot of other things to worry about. So we'll try to keep it as concise as possible, basic. You can respond to it. We'll work with a format that you're comfortable with. And the goal is really to extract the lessons learned from your progress and final reports so we can tell the story to other members of the community of the reuse and repair industry. So we'll make it work, and we do not want to overburden you with it. That's my answer. And also, DEQ really encourages folks to document their project, whether it be with pictures or videos, to make sure that it's a fun and dynamic way to kind of report back on all the great work that you've been doing. And then, so if I currently have a project in the general grant program and I'm applying to this one, will I be penalized? The answer is no, but know that the evaluation committee will have access to your, general grant progress reports or final reports to understand how it is to be working with you and how far along in your project and how far along you are in your project. So I think that covers all of, oh yeah, if your business is currently not open, but you plan to reopen it, in a couple months, and you're closed because of the current situation, you can still apply because, the grant funds will only be available later in July, somewhere early September or later. So you can base your application on an estimation that you're going to be reopening, and DEQ welcomes that, and DEQ does not penalize any applicant for that. So keep that into consider. You will not be penalized if you're currently closed and applying. So I think that covers all of the questions now. Once again, I recommend going online and looking at our frequently asked page, and please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'll answer the questions as best I can, but I will not give content-based recommendation. I'm not going to read your application before you submit it, just to be fair on the type of help that's provided to everybody. And I can provide application documents from previous cycles, just so if you're new to the grant world and you want to know kind of an example of how some people answered some of these questions, I can share that as a reference only, and you only need to make sure that you archive it properly. And I also just want to point out that I'm the main point person for this grant program. So any questions related to this grant, please reach out to me, and I'll be glad to answer them. So thank you very much for connecting.